Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat. For connection for the ladies, we have kept the more in line. So when we start praise, I would request first to fill those, the middle line, so that we can connect to the sisters, and then inshallah join parallelly afterwards. Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر ولله الحمد. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن عليًا ولي الله. أشهد أن عليًا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. حي على خير العمل. حي على خير العمل. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما.
There's a quick announcement. VW, I think, has lights on. IDS P06. VW black color car has lights on. If you have the car, please see. Thank you.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. حي على خير العمل. حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة. قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. صلاة المغرب. إن صلاتي ونسكي ومحياي ومماتي لله رب العالمين. إني وجهت وجهي الذي فطر السماوات والأرض حنيفا. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواسوا بالحق وتواسوا بالصبر. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأرقى وأسجد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. كذلك الله ربي. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الحمد لله وخير الأسماء لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأرقى وأسجد. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد. ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد. ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد. ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. يا لطيف ارحم عبدك الضعيف. الله أكبر. الحمد لله وخير الأسماء لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا علي يا عظيم يا غفور يا رحيم أنت الرب العظيم الذي ليس كمثله شيء وهو السميع البصير وهذا شهر عظمته وكرمته وشرفته وفضلته على الشهور وهو شهر الذي فرضت صيامه عليه وهو شهر رمضان الذي أنزلت فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان فجعلت فيه ليلة القدر وجعلتها خيرا من 1000 شهر فيا ذا المن ولا يمن عليك من علي بفكاك رقبتي من النار في من تمن عليه وادخلني الجنة برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن عليا ولي الله أشهد أن عليا حجة الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله صلاة العشاء إن صلاتي ونسقي ومحياي ومماتي لله رب العالمين وجهت وجهي الله أكبر بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواسوا بالحق وتواسوا بالصبر الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده الله أكبر استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده الله أكبر بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأرقى وأسجد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد كذلك الله ربي الله أكبر اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الحمد لله وخير الأسماء لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأرقى وأسجد. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأرقى وأسجد. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد. ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد. ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد. ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. يا لطيف ارحم عبدك الضعيف. الله أكبر. الحمد لله وخير الأسماء لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. على محمد وآل محمد.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم ادخل على أهل القبور السرور. اللهم اغن كل فقير. اللهم اشبع كل جائع. اللهم اكس كل عريان. اللهم اقض دين كل مدين. اللهم فرج عن كل مكروب. اللهم رد كل غريب. اللهم فك كل أسير. اللهم اصلح كل فاسد من أمور المسلمين. اللهم اشف كل مريض. اللهم غير سوء حالنا بحسن حالك. اللهم اقض عنا الدين وأغننا من الفقر، إنك على كل شيء قدير. اللهم
السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا خديجة الكبرى، السلام عليك يا حسن المتبى، السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله الحسين، السلام عليكم يا أئمة المسلمين، علي بن الحسين، محمد بن علي، وجعفر بن محمد، وموسى بن جعفر، وعلي بن موسى، محمد بن علي، وعلي بن محمد، والحسن بن علي. السلام عليك يا حجة الله يا ابن الحسن يا صاحب الزمان، أجل الله لك ما وعدك من الناس وذور الأمر ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك توعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا.
Test, 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 test. Test, 1, 2, 3. Test, 1, 2, 3. Test, test. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Test, 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 test. Okay, that's much better. Test, 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 test.
This better?
Look where it is.
Is that number 4?
Because of the gain. All right? So now, no hissing. Can you do a quick test?
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. A little bit. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. I think it's good. It's good.
So look at
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والفجر وليال عشر والشفع والوتر والليل إذا يسر هل في ذلك قسم لذي حجر ألم تر كيف فعل ربك بعاد إرم ذات العماد التي لم يخلق مثلها في البلاد وثمود الذين جابوا الصخر بالواد وفرعون ذي الأوتاد الذين طغوا في البلاد فأكثروا فيها الفساد فسب عليهم ربك سوط عذاب إن ربك لبالمرصاد فأما الإنسان إذا ما ابتلاه ربه فأكرمه ونعمه فيقول ربي أكرمن وأما إذا ما ابتلاه فقدر عليه رزقه فيقول ربي أهانن كلا بل لا تكرمون اليتيم ولا تحاضون على طعام المسكين وتأكلون التراث أكلا لما وتحبون المال حبا جمعا كلا إذا دكت الأرض دكا وجاء ربك والملك صفعا صفعا وجيء يومئذ بجهنم يومئذ يتذكر الإنسان وأنى له الذكرى يقول يا ليتني قدمت لحياتي فيومئذ لا يعذب عذابه أحد ولا يوثق وثاقه أحد يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية فادخلي في عبادي وادخلي جنتي صدق الله العلي العظيم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يسبح لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض الملك القدوس العزيز الحكيم هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة وإن كانوا من قبل لفي ضلال مبين وآخرين منهم لما يلحقوا بهم وهو العزيز الحكيم ذلك فضل الله يؤتيه من يشاء والله ذو الفضل العظيم مثل الذين حملوا التوراة ثم لم يعملوها كمثل الحمار يحمل أسفارا بئس مثل القوم الذين كذبوا بآيات الله والله لا يهدي القوم الظالمين قل يا أيها الذين حادوا إن زعمتم أنكم أولياء لله من دون الناس فتمنحوا الموت إن كنتم صادقين ولا يتمنونه أبدا بما قدمت أيديهم والله عليم بالظالمين قل إن الموت الذي تفرون منه فإنه ملاقيكم ثم تردون إلى عالم الغيب والشهادة فينبئكم بما كنتم تعملون يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا نودي للصلاة من يوم الجمعة فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله وذروا البيع ذلكم خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون فإذا قضيت الصلاة فانتشروا في الأرض وابتغوا من فضل الله واذكروا الله كثيرا لعلكم تفلحون وإذا رأوا تجارة أو لهوا انفضوا إليها وتركوك قائما قل ما عند الله خير من اللحم ومن التجارة والله خير الرازقين صدق الله العلي العظيم.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم سيد Shabbir Kirmani. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Sayyid Shabbir Kirmani, Sheikh Mumtaz Ali, respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sir Fatah is requested for the Salah Sawab of the Marhumin listed on the screen and for all Marhumin. Al-Fatiha. Ya'man Yujibu is requested for the names listed on the screen and for all those in need here and elsewhere. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه يكشف السوء 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 أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه يكشف السوء. Shah Ramadan programs. This year, we are privileged to have Sayyid Shabbir Kirmani and Sheikh Muhammad Al-Hilli as our guest speakers throughout the holy month. We will also have a world-renowned reciter, Al-Hajj Abu Dhar Al-Halawaji, grace us for the last 15 nights with eloquent recitations of dua. Don't miss out on the great opportunity to immerse yourself in spirituality. From today onwards, both the gents and ladies have started darsa from 7 p.m. to 7:30 p.m., after which we will have dua iftitah at 7:30 p.m., followed by Maghribin Salah, Iftar, and the daily lecture. For the full schedule, please refer to our weekly newsletter and or WhatsApp broadcast. Shah Ramadan events. This Shah Ramadan, we will have a variety of activities and programs organized by our committees, some of which are shown on the screen. For Shah Ramadan this year, we will have a Quran memorization challenge for ladies of all ages and boys up to 10 years of age. There will also be a ladies' Quran competition open to all women ages 25 plus. Please RSVP 407-309-0541 by April 10th to register. In addition, we will also have a youth Fajr and Suhoor program starting tomorrow for 5 weeks, and the youth will also have a sports day on April 9th. To RSVP for the sports day, please RSVP by April 4th. In addition, our annual Interfaith Iftar will be on April 13th, in which the program will start at 6:15 p.m. Lastly, there will be a kids sleepover on April 15th for girls and April 29th for girls ages 10 to 14. For more details and to sign up for them, kindly refer to our weekly newsletter. Shah Ramadan sponsorship and donations. This Shah Ramadan, there are many opportunities to support your masjid, including sponsorship for iftar, tabarruk, hadiyah for the speakers, as well as a general Ramadan fund. We suggest a donation of $250 per family for the Shah Ramadan fund. However, any amount is welcome. Our budget for the entire month is $143,350, of which we have collected $27,900. We would like to take the opportunity to thank all our sponsors for their support. If you would like to donate, please contact Brother Murtaza Kareem, Brother Jabir Chatu, or Sister Batul Muki at the number on the screen, or Zelle at donate@masjidhayy.org, or go to our website's payment center to make a donation. At this time, I would like to invite Sayyid Shabbir to recite tonight's majlis with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فوضوا أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا اللهم صل على محمد وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الدين عند الله الإسلام صدق الله العلي العظيم زينوا مجالسكم بالصلوات على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على My respected elders, brothers and sisters in Iman here in Florida, across the globe, wherever you're hearing my voice, Salamun alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Question, who is Abu Dhar? We've embarked on a journey to try to understand the lives of the companions of the Holy Prophet, and thereafter we'll be following this with a conversation surrounding the scholars who preserved Islam. At this point we are discussing those companions who helped to build Islam. And next we'll be discussing those scholars who helped lay the foundation to preserve Islam. Why are we having this conversation? We mentioned last night the motivation behind it, that sometimes when we talk about the Prophet, sometimes when we talk about the Imams, there's an element within that that is embedded and implicit in that, which is that these are individuals who are ma'soom or have isma within them. And that is, if someone is ma'soom and if they have isma, that is, they are immaculate, then how am I supposed to relate to this person? And that is a fair point. Now, in our belief system, it's not that they cannot sin. The concept is, according to the scholars and the ulama, is that they do not sin. Much like you have the ability, what the scholars say is, much like you have the ability to roll around in the mud. Physically, you're able to. You can think this thought, to roll around in the mud. But you would not do this. The same way, every sin, whether major or minor, whatever sin it is, for them, that sin seems so something that is so terrible that they would never even fathom it. They would never consider it. Leaving that conversation aside, This is one element of the equation. People we can relate to. These companions, although they have a very high position, they are not masoom. They do not have isma. That is, they can make mistakes, much like you and I make mistakes, number one. Similarly, a layer beneath them is the scholars, which we will discuss in coming nights, inshallah. This is the first level of the equation. The second level of the equation relates to Karbala and relates to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, as well as the Imam of our time, that is the Hussein of our time. Oftentimes you will find in our lectures, in our majalis, in our discussions, we say that, oh, if I were in Karbala, if I had the opportunity to be with Imam al-Hussein, and inshallah, if Allah give us that honor, there is a Hussein of our time, that is the Imam of our time. How can we try to be one of the comrades, one of the companions, one of the people of the Imam? One way to understand that is to get spiritual role models, such as the personalities that we are discussing last night, tonight, and in the following nights. Who are our spiritual role models? We need to understand that Islam, like many of the other great religions of the world, has a very rich spiritual tradition. And in our world, where we're facing a lot of these challenges, one of the biggest challenges of the 21st century, the 20th and now the 21st century, according to philosophers, sociologists, and psychologists, is the lack of meaning in life. And we're searching for spirituality. People in our world are starving for spirituality. You go to, for example, the west coast of the United States, for example, one which has become more liberal. I'm not giving this from my own pocket. I'll give you an example. There was a company in Germany that did extremely well. It was a company that was based on a model of marketing and branding that was called identity marketing. Identity marketing is what? That you identify with a concept and you purchase those products. What was the name of the shoe company? The shoe company was called Atheist Shoes, and it would write on the sole, atheist. The concept was people who identify with that system or that structure of belief would wear this shoe. When this company sold like wildfire in Germany, they thought to themselves, how can we expand this to the next level? Which market should we expand our business to next? That is, which place would have the most people who would identify with this concept? So they looked east, they looked west, they found the place that resonated the most with them was actually a place called California. You may have heard of it, on the west coast of the United States. If you know the map of the United States, according to sociologists, religion in America is very different, whether you're in the east or the west, the north or the south. Where we are right now is considered what sociologists called the Bible Belt. That is, from Virginia to Texas. This is considered the most religious part of America. When you go to, for example, the coasts, people are less religious. In Midwest of the United States, that region, people are similarly more religious to the Bible Belt, similar. But on the coast, on the East Coast, people are less religious. And the most liberal, according to sociologists, the most liberal region of America is the West Coast. Why? Because the people who moved westward historically were pioneers. They were people who moved during the 1849 gold rush. If you recall, that I've mentioned to you numerous times, there's a football team called the 49ers, the San Francisco 49ers. Why are they called that? They are called that because there was a movement in 1849, there was a gold rush where people moved westwards and they were looking for gold. At that point in time, you saw those people were not as attached to the church and religious communities. So what happened? I told you this whole aspect of the equation to explain one thing. Even in a place like California, which historically has been very liberal, you are finding people are gravitating toward Buddhism and Hinduism. They don't believe in that as a religion, but they are looking and starving for spirituality. That's what they're looking for. Our world is looking and seeking for it. Within our vein, within Islam, how do we get it? To get it, you follow the lives of these companions who we are discussing. The likes of Salman, the likes of Abu Dhar, the likes of Miqdad, the likes of Ammar bin Yasir, the likes of Bilal. These individuals form the foundation of spirituality. Last night we discussed, very quickly, we discussed Salman. And I told you that Salman has a high position, not only amongst Muslims, he also has a high position, as I told you, amongst, for example, the Ahlul Sunnah community within Islam. I told you the words of Ibn Arabi, who is from Andalus, and he's someone who wrote the Bezels of Wisdom, Fusus al-Hikam. In that he says, he makes the argument that Salman, this statement of Rasulullah, where he says, Salman minna ahlul bayt, raises Salman to the level of isma, or immaculateness. Now, his view, not ours. Similarly, and I told you the Alawite view, the Nusayri view, that we typically say they just believe Imam Ali is God. That's not exactly what they believe. They believe that the Spirit of God manifested itself in three people, in Muhammad, in Ali, and in Salman al-Farsi or Salman al-Muhammadi. That's within the Alawite view, that is in the Levant region of Syria and Lebanon, this area, the Alawites that are there. Furthermore, every Sufi order within Islam has an immense respect for Salman. They all go back to Rasulullah, Amir al-Mu'mineen, and Salman is the third person who's most revered within the belief system of the Sufis, the people who are the spiritual Sufis within Islam. That's where we left off. Building on that, we also mentioned, and I wanted to highlight, that Salman is that person who died in a state where he was very elderly. And the narrations say that he was either 250 years old, 300 years old, some narrations say 400, some even say 500 years old. There may be some element of exaggeration in his age, but we don't know. But there is one element that I wanted to share with you, that when he died in Madain, the narrations say the arrangements for his burial and his funeral and all the respects that were paid were done by Imam Ali alayhi salam. Based on this, that a ma'soom, like Imam Ali, made the arrangements of the burial and the prayer of Salman, and the principle that the person who does the ghusl and kafan, the ma'soom does the ghusl and kafan of a ma'soom, some scholars make the argument that Salman was from the awsiya of Nabi Isa alayhi salam. He was from one of the disciples of Jesus, peace be upon him. That's what they argue. Now this is a debate amongst the scholars, but regardless, they say the highest level of Iman after the Imams, after Rasulullah, is Salman. Salman is on the 10th level of Iman, and on the 9th level of Iman is Abu Dhar, who we will be discussing tonight. And I mentioned to you that the narration says, with respect to this, there is a narration of the Prophet that you and I need to know. And that narration is that if Abu Dhar knew what was in the heart of Salman, he would have killed. This is how typically it's translated, but it needs to be explained. He would have killed Salman. That is how it's typically said. But the scholars say the interpretation and the meaning of this is not what you and I think. And I shared the line of poetry last night that the poet in Urdu says, "Ay Abu Zar dosti chalti rahe to theek hai, pooch mat lena aqeeda Hazrat Salman se." The idea that Abu Dhar, based on this riwayah, Abu Dhar is not able to handle and tolerate what is in the heart of belief of Salman. That's how much gap there is between 9th and 10th level of Iman. Now, this does not mean that if he knew, this is one thing that needs to be clarified. If Abu Dhar knew, that this does not mean that he would have killed, hasha lillah, Salman. Abu Dhar is much above this. A normal believer, a normal human being knows that you would not kill another person. Of course, Abu Dhar knows this. So what does it mean? The scholars say it has two meanings. One is that the burden and the weight of what Salman knew, Salman's heart was able to keep it and able to hold that burden. But if Abu Dhar was able to have that in his heart would not be able to hold that burden. So that burden would cause him to die. This is one thing. The second, which the scholars say, is what you will understand when we discuss Abu Dhar in a moment. That Abu Dhar was someone who was brutally honest. He was so honest that the narrations by Rasulullah, according to all Muslims, say that the sky did not shade anyone more honest than Abu Dhar. And the earth did not carry the weight of anyone more honest than Abu Dhar. And the sun did not hit anyone who was more honest than Abu Dhar. The scholars say that, if I can use an analogy, if you'll indulge me for a moment, if you, for example, watch cricket or some sport like this, in cricket, if those of you know, there's some concept of somebody who is a bowler, there's someone who is a batter, there's someone who's an all-rounder, someone who can do everything. According to this, the scholars make the argument that Salman is someone, if you take all of his abilities together, he's at the maximum level. That is, he's the all-rounder in terms of Iman. He's at the highest level from that perspective. But when it comes to individual traits, sometimes somebody who's a bowler, one bowler is better than another all-rounder, for example, just in bowling. Similarly, when it comes to truth, although Salman was very honest, no doubt, but brutal honesty and absolute truth, the Ahlul Bayt said the highest position in terms of honesty was this individual. In fact, the narrations say that Rasulullah said with respect to Abu Dhar, he said, Abu Dhar from my ummah, from my nation, is like Isa ibn Maryam. That is Jesus, peace be upon him. In terms of what? In terms of his zuhad and his wara. That is in terms of his asceticism, his staying away from materialism, and his piety.
That is his piety and his wara. That is that the Prophet is saying this person has that connection and that esteemed position. We pick up this conversation here, and in the brief moments, inshallah, I won't burden you too much. What do I want to look at in terms of the life of Abu Dhar? Number one, I want to look at where did he originate from? Where was he from? What tribe was he from? What was his early life like? And what were the indicators of his life, number one, that showed who he would become later, number one. Number two, I want to look at how did he come to Rasulullah and how did he accept Islam and what is the story and what is the journey behind that. Number three, I want to look at what were those challenges that he faced after Rasulullah's demise, after Rasulullah left this world. What difficulties and adversities did this individual have to face? And at the next level and final level, I want us to understand what lessons can we take from the life of this individual, from the life of Abu Dhar, to implement in our lives so that we can be those people who are part of the companions of the Imam of our time, the Hussein of our time, the Ali of our time. This is our agenda for the night. Wherever you are, here in Florida or across the globe, from the bottom of your heart, send a salawat on Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Allahumma sallam. At the first level, this conversation has many parallels, and I mentioned some of them last night. One of them had to do with the concept of when we talked about Salman, we said Salman had to go through many phases to finally get to Islam. And similarly with Abu Dhar, these are people who came to Islam. Abu Dhar, according to the ulama, he was either the fourth or the fifth Muslim, after of course the Ahlul Bayt. He was the fourth or fifth Muslim, one of the earliest people to come to Islam. But Salman had a very long journey to get to Islam. What does it relate to our modern world? Those people who are reverts, who are converts, those people who may not have gotten Islam on a silver platter, what struggles did they get through and go through in order to be followers of Islam? We need to empathize with that. Sometimes people leave their family, they leave their relatives, they leave people, and they leave their connections that they had just to become followers of Islam. Do we support them? Do we look after them? Do we provide them any solace or any support in that regard? And what were those things? Number one. Number two, if we look at the long-term trajectory, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, you may find that people don't value the struggles and the difficulties through which this madhab was attained. If you ask your grandparents, if you ask your great-grandparents, if you read, I was just forwarded the history, may Allah bless Dr. Hassan Walji, he's done a lot of research, and others who've done research on the history of the Khwaja community, and there's a lot of struggles that happened to be able to get to this. There was a movement from Hinduism towards Ismailism, and then ultimately to Ithna Ashari, Shiaism. Well, ask those elders who made that migration, and that spiritual migration, I should say, to try to get to Islam and the truth of Islam. It was not easy. For us to say that we won't and that we move away from this would be a travesty. So we need to understand those difficulties. I'll explain very quickly. There's an old saying in America, if you know the history of America, and that's when immigrants used to come to America, it had to do with business. And they would say that in America, it's shirt sleeve to shirt sleeve in 3 generations. What does it mean, shirt sleeve to shirt sleeve in 3 generations? The idea was the first generation would come to America in the 100 years ago, 200 years ago. They would come to America with humble means and they would build up their business from scratch. They had hardly anything and they would build up their business. If you know the history of America, there's a book I recommend you read. It's called The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism by Max Weber. Max Weber is one of the great sociologists who's one of the fathers of sociology. And he said that America was built by Protestants, as you know, not Catholics. They were persecuted by Catholics in Europe, and then they made the migration to America. Those are the Protestants. The Protestants who emerged roughly 600 years ago after the Protestant Reformation. These Protestants who came, they had a belief, in particular within Protestants, they're Calvinist Protestants. Calvinist Protestants, they believed in predestination. So they were always looking for who is a Jannati, who is a person in their belief system who's going to heaven. So because they said the people who are going to heaven and the people who are going to hell is already determined. So who's going to heaven? They said somebody who does good for their community, their society, and their family through their business is someone who's going to heaven. That was one of the signs of someone who's a Jannati in their view system. That is, someone who worked hard and the excess profits that they had, they didn't spend it on themselves, they funneled it back into their family and their community. So this is what gave rise to America. But historically, over time, that spirituality of Protestantism, it left the equation and it gave rise economically to materialism. So that movement shifted away. That's why it's very important to understand those struggles. So coming back, shirt sleeve to shirt sleeve in 3 generations means what? The first generation comes to America, they hardly have anything, they build up a business. The second generation, the children of the first generation, they see the struggles which their parents went through and they build the business up more. They don't squander the wealth. The third generation comes, they did not see any of the original struggles of their grandparents. They only saw the business that their parents, the second generation, built up more, and they began to spend the wealth left, right, and center, and they squandered the money. And the fourth generation, the third generation went back to zero, fourth generation had to build up from scratch again. This was a theme that repeated throughout history. You may find that this also happens spiritually to us, that we may not realize through which struggles we have come to this belief system, and spirituality begins to decline. I'm not saying that's an absolute. Some people may even increase. People may find other forms of increasing their spirituality. Nonetheless, coming to Abu Dhar. When we come to Abu Dhar, this person was from Banu Ghaffar. Banu Ghaffar was a tribe that was well known at that time. They were known for a couple of things. They were idolaters at that time, but they were known, their business was, they were highway bandits. They were highway robbers. So they would be on the track between Mecca and Medina, and they would ambush tribes and they would hold them hostage. There wasn't much economy there, as you know, and so they would hold hostage and they would ransom people and they would say, give us your money, give your loot, and they would take it. Now, Abu Dhar was someone who was a thinker from a young age. He was always thinking. 2 things never stuck well with him. Number 1, he did not feel comfortable with idolatry. He said, it doesn't make any sense that you are worshiping these idols. It doesn't make any logical sense to me that you're believing in these idols. Now, at that time, before he came to Islam, the narrations say there was a famine that ensued in his area where his tribe was. When this famine ensued, they used to believe in these idols. Much like the ancient Greeks, and other religions, they had a god of love and a god of war and a god of this and a god of that. So they had a god for their tribe as well. They believed especially in Manat. Manat, Lat, Uzza, Hubal. These are the idols that they had at that time. They were especially believers in Manat. At that point in time, privately, Abu Dhar told one of his friends that how do these people believe in these different idols? It doesn't make any sense. Now, let me paint a picture for you. The whole tribe and the whole city and the whole town, they are praying to this idol so they get some rain so that the drought finishes and the famine finishes so they have something to eat. And they're praying to this idol. And Abu Dhar is telling his friend, this is nonsense. What are they believing in this idol? It doesn't make any sense. What's wrong with them? His friend said, look, Abu Dhar, you're an honest guy. But look, if you say this in front of people, they'll have your head. Because they are praying left, right, and center to this idol, and they believe if they find out what your belief is about this idol, they'll say that this is a bad omen, that this is an adhab from the gods, that because of you and your belief, we are all having to suffer. Do you know that the ancient Greeks used to have this belief that when thunder would happen, when earthquakes would happen, the gods are angry. Similarly, the Arabs had this type of belief that, for example, this person's amongst us, he doesn't believe in these idols, he's the cause of us suffering, get rid of him. So he said, Abu Dhar, keep this to yourself. His real name was Jundub. Abu Dhar was his name afterwards, after he had his son by the name of Dhar. His name was given. But his name was Jundub. He was from Banu Ghaffar. This was the first element. Secondly, he did not sit well with highway robbery. He said robbery is wrong, theft is wrong, we should not be doing this. His companion and his friend said, don't do this is wrong. Further than this, one of his friends and one of his companions said, Abu Dhar, you are saying these things, or Jundub, you are saying these things, you sound a lot like this one young man who's come in Mecca, who is telling people that there are no idols, these idols have no value, there is only one God. Abu Dhar said he didn't know anything about it. He said, this sounds right to me. This sounds like the truth to me. I must go out and seek the truth. I must go out and find what is reality. He makes the journey towards Mecca from his tribe. When he gets towards Mecca, the first day he goes towards the Kaaba, he's looking for the Prophet, he's looking for Rasulullah. He's standing in the vicinity of the Kaaba, but he doesn't meet Rasulullah. He passes by. Who passes by? Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali alayhi salam, as a young man passes by. He says that you look like a stranger, you look like you're not from around town, you look like you're from somewhere else. He said, yes, I'm visiting here. He says, why don't you come stay the house at the night? With us. That is, why don't you stay at the house of Abu Talib? Imam Ali says to Abu Dhar or Jundub. He says, why don't you come stay at the house? He says, very well. He comes, he stays the first night. Now, if you remember, the Arabs had some traits even before Islam that were good. By the way, if you know, we typically talk about culture in Islam. Whenever you say that all culture is bad, you don't really understand the depth of the matter. No religion has ever existed without a culture. When you say I have a problem with culture and religion, all we actually do is we transfer one culture to the other. Because religions don't exist without cultures. If I had time, I would expand on this, but one element. Whenever a religion came to a demographic of Allah, whether Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, it did one of three things. It either absorbed the culture, elements of the culture, it either rejected elements of the culture, or it transformed elements of that culture. Stay with me here. What do I mean? Number one, when Islam came in the 6th century to Arabia, it absorbed certain things, it rejected certain things, and it transformed certain things. What did it reject? Rasulullah said, there is no God except God. That is La ilaha illallah. It rejected idolatry, number one. Number two, it came forward and accepted certain things, because the Arabs, we sometimes don't acknowledge this, but they had some good traits. Yes, some of them used to bury their daughters alive. That's terrible, that's atrocious, no doubt. But at the same time, they had certain good traits. What were the good traits? They had generosity. Before Islam, they had generosity. Islam absorbed this. Third, Islam transformed things. For example, what? Before Islam, you could marry as many as people. There was no limitation on how many people you married. Therefore, many people married 20, 30, countless people throughout their life. Islam put a condition. It transformed and said, you can marry up to 4, if and only if you are able to do justice between them. And justice is a huge argument in and of itself. It's not just financial justice. It's not just economic justice. It's not just time justice. It's a whole combination of things. Nonetheless, coming to this aspect, they had generosity. So for 3 days, the Arabs would not ask someone why they've come to town. They would just be hospitable and generous to them. Similarly, Imam Ali showed this generosity and he welcomed Jundub or Abu Dhar to the house. First night he stayed there, next night he gets up, the next morning he gets up and he goes back to the Kaaba. When he goes to the Kaaba, he stands all day by the Kaaba, he's looking for Rasulullah, he's looking for the Prophet. No cigar, he didn't get any luck at that point, as they say. Imam Ali comes to him again, he says, why don't you come and be our guest again? Second night, he stays the night again. Third day, he comes in the morning, he stays by the Kaaba, looking for Rasulullah, looking for Rasulullah, looking for Rasulullah, nothing again. He comes back, Imam Ali says, why don't you stay the night? He brings him, he stays the night. On the third day, after Arab hospitality had been fulfilled and the rites had been fulfilled, he said, now it's been 3 days, why don't you tell us why you have come? Why have you come to Mecca? What are you looking for? What are you seeking? He says, I have been told by people in my tribe, there is someone who is calling out and saying this idolatry is not right, that there is only one God, and that's the only absolute God, and I'm looking for that individual. Who is that? And Amir al-Mu'minin says, that is none other than the Prophet, and he takes him to Rasulullah. He sits with Rasulullah for a few moments, and when he sits with Rasulullah for a few moments, after a few minutes, he then eventually, maybe an hour or two, he accepts Islam, and he said, this is the right religion. Now at that point in time, Islam is not in its strength. There was heavy persecution, you'll remember. Islam in the early days, Rasulullah was by the Kaaba, people used to throw intestines and no one could help Rasulullah because there was such persecution. But what happens is when he accepts Islam, Abu Dhar, he then goes towards the Kaaba, he stands by the Kaaba and he shouts out and he screams out to the people. He says, oh people, I want you to know, La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. He says that there is no God except Allah, there is no God except Allah, and that there is messenger as Rasulullah. As soon as he said this, the Muslim said, hold on, what are you doing? We're in a state where we can't say anything. The people who are the idolaters, the people who are the opposition, they take him, they begin to beat him left, right and center. They said, Abu Dhar, didn't you know? They protect him and they take him back to Imam Ali's house, Abu Talib's house. They look after him and said, Abu Dhar, you know what's the situation. The next day, same thing happens. He goes by the Kaaba and he screams and he shouts out to the people, there is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. The second day, again they beat him, take him back to Imam Ali's house, Abu Talib's house. Says, Abu Dhar, you don't realize what's going on. Some people just cannot lie. Have you ever met a friend like that, a person? They're just straight. They cannot do it otherwise. That's just how he was. That's how Abu Dhar was. That's why the narration said that the sky has not sheltered anyone more honest than Abu Dhar. The earth has not held the weight of anyone more honest than Abu Dhar. The sun has not shed its rays on anyone more honest than Abu Dhar. The third day, the same thing happened. He went and he said, there is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. They were about to beat him when Abbas, the uncle of Rasulullah, comes and he says, look, this guy, this man, Jundub, he's an individual, he's from Banu Ghaffar. Banu Ghaffar is a known tribe. They are people who are on the route from Mecca to Medina. If you want peace and tranquility, don't beat him. If he goes back and tells his people, they will have implications and repercussions on you. You'll have to deal with. They said, okay, it makes sense, it makes sense. So they let him go. I'm fast forwarding in the interest of time. One other element of the equation is he spent much time with Rasulullah, Abu Dhar did. In the battle of Tabuk, in the expedition of Tabuk, Tabuk was not a battle, it was an expedition. They were going towards battle, but the battle didn't happen. And when the people were going there, Abu Dhar is on his camel in his ride and he's going with the crowd, but his animal that he's riding becomes slow. It's not able to keep up. It would, as we would say, it started to get out of gas, for example. It was not able to go the distance. They came to Rasulullah and said, Ya Rasulullah, Abu Dhar is staying behind, because there were some people who didn't want to go on the expedition of Tabuk. Why? Because business was good, it was the time for the harvest. They said, why are we going to sacrifice all this and go with Rasulullah? Nonetheless, Rasulullah said, if there's good in him, he will join us. Of course, Rasulullah knows, but he's telling the other people. At that point in time, his animal stops and Abu Dhar is faced with the decision. What does he do? It's the middle of the desert, the caravan's going further and further. At that point in time, Abu Dhar gets off from his camel, and he starts to walk into the barren desert, running after the caravan of Rasulullah. Look at the belief. He's running in the middle of the desert. And at that point in time, the people see in a distance, someone's running in the desert. They say, who is it? They realized it was Abu Dhar. And when they got to Abu Dhar, he was painting, he was out of breath. Rasulullah says, give him water. But they realized he had water with his hands, in a mashk, as we would call it. He said, Abu Dhar, you have water, you haven't drank it. He said, yes, I passed by some water on the way here, but I did a niyyah in my heart that how can I drink water without Rasulullah having drunk water? Rasulullah must also be thirsty. He says, this is the love of Abu Dhar. And Rasulullah exalted his position, and he gave many famous statements about him. Further than this is the element that I wanted to conclude on, and that is this. What happened with Abu Dhar after the martyrdom of Rasulullah? What happened? That is, if Rasulullah is saying he's the most honest person, and he's the fourth or the fifth Muslim, what did the Muslim world do with him? They did not value him. In Bukhari, one of the biggest books of Shia, of hadith within the Ahl Sunnah Muslim world, you will only find 14 hadiths from Abu Dhar. Imagine, the most honest person according to Rasulullah, only 14. Whereas other people, how many you find from them? Anyways, what happened during the time of the first Khalifa, the second Khalifa? What was the state of Abu Dhar? Abu Dhar was in that environment where there was a person, for example, Hakam ibn As. Hakam ibn As, Rasulullah used to bother Rasulullah a lot. Rasulullah banished him to Taif during his life. He said, you need to go to Taif. He banished him. When the first Khalifa came, we must give credit where credit is due. The third, who would become the third Khalifa, Uthman. Uthman is the first Umawi or Umayyad ruler. Uthman comes to Abu Bakr. He says, I want you to take my relative who's been banished, Hakam ibn As, and allow him to come back to Medina. He said, Rasulullah banished him. I cannot allow him to come back. Credit due to the first Khalifa. Second Khalifa's time comes. The third, who would become the third Khalifa, Uthman, says, I want you to let my relative come back, Hakam ibn As. He says, no, Rasulullah banished him. You cannot let him come back. But when he came to power, the third Khalifa, the first thing he did was he allowed Hakam to come back. The one Rasulullah had banished. Abu Dhar spoke out. And Abu Dhar spoke out again and again, to the point that this person, the third Khalifa, he says, this guy is too much of a problem for me, Abu Dhar. He needs to be banished. So what did he do? He says he sent him to Damascus. Who was in Damascus? Muawiyah was in Damascus. When he sent him to Damascus, Muawiyah was building this huge palace. 12 million dinars at that time. Money. Whose money? Not his money, the people's money. Abu Dhar began to stand in front of this palace that was being constructed, and he started to recite the verses of the Quran and telling, how is this person misappropriating funds of the people and building his own palace? Muawiyah said, this guy's a big problem for me, because they were related, as you know, they were part of the Umayyad clan, Uthman and Muawiyah. He said, what type of headache did you send to me? He says to Uthman, Muawiyah does. He banished him to Lebanon. You know, in Levant, the south is called Jabal Amil. This is where a lot of Shias are there till today, and I'm concluding inshallah. A lot of Shias are in Jabal Amil. A lot of those Shias who are in Jabal Amil in Lebanon today, they owe a debt to what Abu Dhar did, because Abu Dhar laid the foundation for Shiaism there. But he started causing issues there for the ruling class there as well. Eventually, Uthman calls him. And when Uthman calls him back to Medina, he says, what's your favorite place, Abu Dhar? What's the best place in the world to you? He says, the best place to me in the world is the vicinity of Rasulullah in Medina. He says, what's the worst place to you? says, Abu Dhar, you had ghibta, you had anger for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sake. So trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He will look after your affairs. He says, Abu Dhar, these people, they had a fear of the dunya. That is, because of your tongue, if you didn't say what you said, they had a fear that their dunya was going away from them because of what you were saying. Whereas you had a fear that because of their actions, your akhirah was going away, your deen was going away. Therefore, what you have done, your stand is correct. And he gives a long statement at that point in time. And then he finally goes and he dies. He takes his daughter, he takes his wife, he takes some animals with him, and some narrations say he has a son who also passed away in Rabada while he was alive, who he buried into the ground. This was the life and times of Abu Dhar. What do we need to say? The lesson we take away from Abu Dhar is absolute honesty in life. Am I honest with myself? Am I honest with my family? Am I honest with my community? Am I honest in terms of when I see something wrong? Do I speak out like Abu Dhar, or do I remain silent under the circumstances based on what other people were doing? We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to have the courage of Abu Dhar in our life. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to learn from the life of Abu Dhar. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to have a fraction of the taqwa and the zuhud and the wara of Abu Dhar, to be like Isa ibn Maryam, as Rasulullah said. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the reappearance of Imam Sahib al-Asr al-Zaman, and to allow us to be amongst his companions when he returns. A final request, if you can please recite Surah Al-Fatiha for the marhumin, for marhum Mahmoud al-Ta'i, as well as for your marhumin, our marhumin, and for the marhumin of all those people who serve the program before, during, and after this program. I invite you, inshallah, to all serve in the month of Ramadan, inshallah, to volunteer. May Allah increase your darajat, inshallah. Al-Fatiha ma'as salawat. Bismillah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
Ziyarat.
السلام عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا رسول الله. السلام عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا سيدتي ويا مولاتي يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا حسن المجتبى. السلام عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا حسين سيد الشهداء. السلام عليك وعلى ولديك العليين وأخيك بالفضل العباس وسائر المستشهدين بين يديك. السلام عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا علي زين العابدين. السلام عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا محمد الباقر. السلام عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا جعفر الصادق. السلام عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا موسى الكاظم. السلام عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا علي الرضا. السلام عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا محمد الجواد. السلام عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا علي الهادي. السلام عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا حسن العسكري. السلام عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا صاحب العصر والزمان. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن. السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان. سيدي عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وجعلنا الله من أنصارك وأعوانك ومن المستشهدين بين يديك. والسلام عليكم يا أهل بيت النبوة جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. All together. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى